Sega Bits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega, with your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of Sega Talk. I'm Barry, with me is George.
Yippee, Kai, yay. I'm not going to say the rest.
Oh, okay. And on this installment, we are going to be covering the year 1996, which, to my memory, we've never covered a game in 96, but this time we're going to do it, and that game is Die Hard Arcade, aka Dynamite Deka. And this is one of those Sega conversations we're going to be having where there are alternating names. So sometimes we might call it Dynamite Deka, sometimes we'll call it Die Hard Arcade, but we're pretty much talking about the same game. So, released to arcades in 1996 and to the Sega Saturn in 1997, Die Hard Arcade was a 3D arcade beat-em-up from Sega AM1 and the Sega Technical Institute. In Japan, the game was known as Dynamite Deka. And Deka, do you know what that's slang for, George?
I actually don't.
It's for detective.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Deka, yeah. So what are your earliest memories of Die Hard Arcade, and have you played both arcade and Saturn versions? And as a bonus, have you played the Japanese version?
I haven't played the Japanese version, but I did see it in arcades. It was one of those, like, you know, when you go to the movies, they always have the little arcade section. This is one of the ones that, like, was there, the one they swapped out. You know, usually they swap them out maybe every couple of years. So I had the benefit of having it in my local movie chain. It was a Regal movie, so it was cool. I liked the arcade experience, but I played it a lot more on the Sega Saturn. I think a lot of people here. Because, I mean, I really liked these early 3D beat-em-up games. I was like, you know, Fighting Force I even played. Even, you know, this one's different, the way that the levels are structured. Like, they're smaller.
Right.
I do remember that. I remember they didn't look like Bruce Willis, and I always wondered that. And I know that's going to be part of the notes, and we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But also, you've suggested doing this game, like, 4 or 5 times, like every other week. You're always like, maybe Die Hard Arcade. So I'm hoping that you have a good story about your history with this game.
No, you know, actually, sometimes I suggest games just because I want to learn more about it. Die Hard Arcade itself, it feels like it's just always been there. You know, it's one of those. It's not one of those Sega games that many people will say that's my favorite game, but it's definitely not one of those Sega games that people like hate or forget about. It's just it's always been there. It's always been a part of our experiences with the company, and being a very rare instance of a licensed Sega game that has spawned its own franchise and is well liked, I thought would be a very interesting conversation. And you know, like you said, I would pitch this one a lot. When I actually got to starting to work on it, I got scared because there was like no information out there on the development, and I was like, what have I done? But thankfully, and I just want to do a plug right now, the Sega Arcade Revolution by Ken Horowitz, who we've had a few times on our interview podcast, the Swing and Report Show, he wrote about 4 pages on the development of this game, and like, thank you to him for doing that, because otherwise I don't think we would be doing this. And a lot of that information, it came from Japanese interviews, Japanese magazines, the 2500 release on the PlayStation 2, which we'll get to eventually, had some, I guess, interview materials as well. So there's some cool stuff coming, so stay tuned. I know some of you guys tune out by this point, maybe because we're boring you. Sorry.
Bit. Just a little bit, right?
Yeah. But as far as my own memories of the game, like I said, it just feels like it's always been there, kind of like Virtua Cop. Like, I know I've played it back in the day, but honestly, it was just probably a part of my arcade experiences. Like, I'd see it, I'd play it, I'd have fun, and then I'd move on. I wouldn't be like, wow, that was a major experience that's going to sit with me for years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, you know, as far as the Saturn version, I've never played the Saturn version. I've only played the American arcade version, and I don't think I've ever played the Japanese one. Galloping Ghost Arcade near me does have Die Hard Arcade, so I played the whole game through about a year ago, which is the one great thing about an arcade with unlimited replays is you can, like, go there for an hour or two and just, like, say you've completed a game. Like, I've played Moonwalker all the way through the arcade one. I've played this one, Golden Axe, Beast Rider, or not Beast Rider, Death Adder. So, you know, it's like, it's nice to be able to do that, and I think after that, it's been fresh in my mind, and I was like, let's do it. It's going to happen eventually, and it's happening now.
So, Barry, when you went to the arcades and you had the unlimited continues, how much money do you think you would have spent if you had to be popping in those quarters?
Well, how much would something like this cost? Like 50 cents, you think?
Let's just pretend it's 25 cents to try.
25 cents, okay. I'd say probably close to $10.
All right, so those passes are worth it for Galloping Ghost, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Like, and I think too, because you're not spending your quarters, you're a little more loose with your lives, because you're like, oh, well, if they kill me, I'll come back. You know, I'll just push that little red button down there. Having said that, there are games there like Space Harrier where I try to push myself not to die so I can, you know, be better at the game and actually have a chance at reaching the end without feeling like I just spammed the extra lives button. But I would say that this is not a cheap game, and it's a very playable game, so there's that. I don't think it becomes too difficult towards the end. I think the main thing is that I often am playing it solo, and it's one of those games where if you're playing it with more than one person, like Streets of Rage, which we recently covered, it goes faster. You know, because the game itself doesn't really ramp up the difficulty depending on how many players are on screen.
Okay. I actually didn't know that.
So from its inception, Dynamite Deka was intended to be a game inspired by the movie Die Hard. Making games inspired by famous movies at the time was nothing new to Sega and the gaming industry in general. What made Dynamite Deka unique, however, was that it was granted the official use of the Die Hard license by Fox Interactive. This move, however, came late in development, and as such, the Japanese versions do not feature the name or license. And we'll get into this later, too. But Dynamite Deka and Die Hard Arcade are effectively, I mean, if you're just being a little nerdy like me right now, they're effectively two different franchises with their own characters, despite the shared plot, essentially the same plot and gameplay of the original game. So what I'm trying to say is, if you were to play Die Hard Arcade, it's a new adventure with John Mcclane from those three original movies. If you're playing Dynamite Deka, it's a new story that spins off into a series of games and cameos with Bruno Dillinger. So with that in mind, you know, it's like this weird parallel universe going on. So George, what's your opinion of Sega in the 80s and 90s being inspired by or basically ripping off popular movies at the time?
I mean,
and I say ripping off because there were times where they straight up lifted like screen grabs from movies and just put them in a game with no thought to legal at all.
See, when I was younger, obviously I didn't care, you know, like I didn't know that they were using Conan the Barbarian screams inside a Golden Axe. I didn't even know really what, you know, Conan the Barbarian was growing up. So it's like some of these experiences to me were the first time. So I guess they shaped my childhood, even if they lifted a lot of the material from like older fantasy books or this one, or in, like some of these games like a cop, you know, like Virtual Cop. Is it Lethal Weapon? I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Is it inspired by media? Of course it's inspired by media, but I guess I just don't really mind it. It's nice that they got the official license for this, but I probably would have played it if it was just called whatever they wanted to call it in the U.S., like, I don't know, Hard Die or something.
Right. I mean, there were other instances where Sega did this. For example, Afterburner's a real Top Gun or any of those like 80s sort of movies. Trying trying to think, what else is there? Super Thunderblade, it straight up ripped like footage from a movie for the title screen and, you know, kind of borrowed some elements there.
Alien Syndrome?
Yeah. So, I mean, they did it a lot. I think this is the first instance where they like straight up, like I'll get into it later, but the creator of the game was straight up like, I'm making Die Hard the game. We'll deal with... And it was just like, you know, like, we'll make it as close as we want to Die Hard. Who cares? Like, there was no real fear of Fox coming down on them should they not even pursue the license. So there's this just kind of weird gung-ho attitude that they had at the time. You would never do something like this now. You know, we wouldn't see, I don't know, like what a Bourne Identity come out. And then, like, a year later, Sega's, like, making a Bourne Identity complete ripoff down to, like, the same plot and the same character. Like, I don't know. It's just, it's very strange. But this, time and time again, in the development of this game, it seems like things just worked out for them perfectly. And there's so many times where this game could have gone wrong, but it worked out. It was such a, I guess... smooth development despite we'll get to that in the end. But there are regional differences and there are character differences. So in the English version, here's the plot. John Mcclane and Chris Thompson, who I believe is an original character to this, try to save the president's daughter named Caroline Powell from terrorists who are led by Wolf Whitefang Hongo. The game takes place in Los Angeles. But in the Japanese version, the heroes are Bruno Dillinger and Cindy Holiday. The game takes place in Eternal City, and I believe that's the name of the skyscraper. I'm not really sure, but it's in San Francisco, pretty much. In both games, the terrorists' goal is to steal vast riches from the penthouse office and, of course, kidnap the president's daughter. Players traverse ventilation systems, hallways, and various rooms to reach the top and to defeat Wolf Hongo. Other bosses include a biker named Hog, a Mexican wrestler named Jocko, and twins named Mr. Oishi, who is a sumo, and Mr. Tubbs, who is an army man, as well as spider robots. At the end of the game, if the players survive, they must battle each other on a rooftop to gain sole credit for rescuing the president's daughter.
Of course.
So, first off, how much do you know about the Die Hard series?
I watched I've seen, I think, every single one, and I know they brought it back recently, right? They did like a trilogy where it's like, I don't know anything, I'm dumb, I'm an old man boomer, and then they have like...
Right.
And then I remember watching the first one, which I guess there's a debate online if it's a Christmas movie. Is that the meme on this movie? So,
right.
Didn't the movie come out in the 80s? Isn't it kind of strange that, like, a decade later, kind of, right? I don't know what year it came out, but I feel like it's either early or mid-80s. And then all of a sudden... Go on.
Well, Die Hard came out in 1988. However, Die Hard 2 came out in 1990, and Die Hard with a Vengeance, which is arguably one of the most popular and sequel, and some people prefer it to the first movie, came out in 1995. So with that in mind, it was fresh in the minds of the public because, like I said, this came out in 96, so you're coming off of the back of one of the most popular sequels to the franchise.
I did watch the third one. I mean, when it was like pretty popular, I remember the hype behind it, so I do remember that there was a big fan base for this. It is, I don't know, it's just interesting. That's all I really know about it. I'm not a huge Die Hard fan or anything. It just, if they come out, I'll watch them.
No.
What about you?
Well, I've growing up, we had the VHS tape of the first film and I believe the third film. It played on TV a lot too. Die Hard 2, I don't think I've ever seen in full, but from what I can tell, it's a relatively different production team behind it, at least when you're talking director. There is a screenwriter who's carried over from the first one, but it honestly was just kind of like So the first one, it's in the office building going up. That's, everyone knows that. He's making his way to the top. Die Hard 2's in a airport, and it's like at Christmas, I think, again. So it kind of does that Home Alone 2 thing where it's like you're basically remaking the first movie, but not as well. Same with, what was that one? The one in Las Vegas where they forget their memories and then they made
Hangover.
like two... What?
Hangover.
Yeah, so it's like Hangover 2 situation there. But the third one, what I think was so great about that was it was originally a completely different script. It was, I think, called Simon Says. And you've got John Mcclane, like, being true to the character, but then you also have Samuel L. Jackson, who's just, like, fantastic in that. And you're dealing with racial issues, you're dealing with like puzzles, you're dealing with running all over New York, so it's not like confined in a tight space, which I think made it different from other Die Hards, but at the same time, I think it worked so well. It was such a refreshing sequel after the second one. And I don't know, you've seen the third Die Hard, right?
Yeah, of course. I think the first one and the third one are the best Die Hard movies out of all of them.
Where he's walking down Harlem with like a racist sign and he's like naked and and he's like, I don't like black people, and Samuel L. Jackson's like, what the fuck? So so with that in mind, that's just kind of giving you guys and girls listening kind of a headspace as to where the public and the developers were when this game was coming out. Like, Die Hard was hot. And it's interesting that they're coming off of the third one when after that the franchise just went dormant until 2007, and the sequels that have come out since are not that great. No. And so the game itself, it's strange because it is almost like a remake of Die Hard. It's even more like the original Die Hard than Die Hard 2 was, which some people say is kind of a ripoff of the first one. You're going up an office building. The difference is that instead of the enemy you had in the movie, it's this weird guy who looks like he's straight out of like Skies of Arcadia. Like he does not fit with. I just always felt that he didn't really fit with the Die Hard universe. You look at him and he's like a pirate in a suit. I don't know. Have you seen this guy? He looks goofy, doesn't he?
Send me a link. I want to see him.
He's in this. If you look at the screenshot comparisons, you can see him on the phone. He's like, but yeah, it's weird stuff. So you're talking about Die Hard, right?
You're talking about the old man, right?
Yeah, the old man.
Okay, yeah.
How did that? I don't know why there's a picture of them there. I don't know in the notes. Anyway, so the game itself. It plays like Streets of Rage meets Virtua Fighter. That's the best I could kind of put it into words for people who haven't played it. Controls are simple. There's a punch, kick, and jump button. Players control Bruno/John or Cindy/Chris in a 3D beat-em-up style on a 2D plane. It sounds weird when I describe it, but it basically is that your character flips the direction they're facing. It's not full free roaming, like it's not like Power Stone, it's more like a 2.5D 3D beat 'em up. So it's, what's a more apt comparison? Maybe like Clockwork Knight, you know what I mean, but with a little more dimension to it.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty fair comparison.
Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I guess. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. You got to play it.
Yeah, when you look at screenshots, you're thinking one thing, but when you play it, you're like, oh, it's 2D beat 'em up, but with 3D graphics. There's a huge emphasis on weapons and objects found on the ground, and even the ability to arrest enemies, removing them from the stage. I've never arrested anyone in this game. No. I didn't know that was an option, but apparently it takes a little time, so it's kind of pointless. You're better off just killing them. Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder, who the designer of this game worked on, he really, I think, sees that as a successor to this game because of the item usage, and I know that that's a game that's very rare. Mm-hmm. It's coming out apparently from Arcade 1-Up as a big cabinet, but if you're looking for like the true kind of successor to Die Hard Arcade, that's the one to look at. And the game's designer, who I keep talking about but not mentioning, is Makoto Uchida. And he said the goal was to make the weapons bigger and flashier in Die Hard Arcade. So with that in mind, what's your favorite item or weapon in the game? I know mine, so I'll just say it. The grandfather clock.
The grandfather.
What's yours?
When I was a kid, we used to joke around every time with the broom. I don't know why. That was the only one that stuck to my mind a lot. But I do remember the game having a lot of weapons. And I do remember the resting thing. I didn't use it, but I remember one of my brothers was like, we should play the game, but only arrest everyone. I mean, we didn't do it, but I just remember us talking about it.
That's funny.
Yeah. Go on.
If it came out to like Xbox Live Arcade, you got to bet that would be like an achievement. Arrest all, like Peacemaker or something like that.
Like maybe they'll do a Sega Ages of it. I mean, they already did one on the PS2, which we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to see a Sega Ages of this. I think this is one of those games that's truly deserving of it. So, despite that 2.5D gameplay, there were transitions from area to area that utilized cutscenes with quick-timer events. A successful QTE results in fewer opponents to battle, but failure results in some loss of health and possibly more enemies, like an extra enemy stage. Because the development team didn't want the game to be perceived as just a side-scrolling beat-em-up, these QTEs were planned from the very beginning to make the game stand apart from past beat-em-up titles. Because the game was using in-game cutscenes, the team wanted to take advantage of this using differing outcomes rather than locked-in outcomes that pre-rendered cutscenes limit a game to. Very, very early on, they were just going to do non-interactive in-game cutscenes, but the team, I think, before they even presented it, they're like, I think management's going to tell us that we need to try harder. So they actually added this interactive element in. And I know often when Shenmue is spoken of, this game is brought up because of the QTEs. They're very similar to Shenmue. And QTEs are nothing new to Sega games. I think Dragon's Lair was basically QTE the game. Mm-hmm. I think in this case, though, it's much more similar to how Shenmue does it, where it doesn't end the game. It's just a different outcome so that you might stumble and then move on. In the case of Shenmue, you have to not do QTEs for a while before you lose. In this case, it's a one-time sort of thing, and it's like a A-B situation. Also, interestingly, the Saturn version, and I just threw this in here because it's just a weird little fact, the Saturn version includes a port of Sega's 1979 arcade game Deep Scan, and if you play it, you can earn extra credits. So if you've ever found the Saturn version to be difficult, just play this a ton, and you're basically doing the Galloping Ghost arcade thing where it's just like an insane amount of credits. Okay, question time. By this point in history, Sega has had a ton of games under their belt. As such, Die Hard Arcade Dynamite Deka felt less like a new concept and more like a mix of past Sega experiences. So what are your thoughts on how this game borrowed from past titles, and do you think the end result was a success?
I would say yes. I mean, I don't know if the arcade was successful because, it's kind of hard to know, unless it's like Daytona USA, which is ridiculously popular. It's popular, but I do remember seeing that in person, and it's usually when you see it in a big chain, I feel like once a chain picks up an arcade or something, that arcade is pretty successful. I would say that, I would say it's everything they did was pretty successful. And it's funny though, because the QTEs were brought back, like you said, and a lot of it was so easy to even think about because Streets of Rage was huge. Die Hard was a huge brand at the time, like you said. It was just a couple of years after the biggest movie they've ever released. So it all kind of fell in the right place. I wonder if there's still a market for a Die Hard arcade game, or not really, or a beat 'em up, using maybe more Yakuza style engine. But I don't know. Ooh. That would be interesting, if there's a market for it. But I mean, Sega and Fox have a pretty good relationship. They did Isolation, so who knows?
That's interesting you mentioned that. I'm reminded of a game that had a 2D like side game. Remember that? We did a news story and got a lot of grief from a few select people because we spoiled an Easter egg. It was like a Streets of Rage homage, but it was like an...
It was Saints Row 4, and it was like
right.
A game within that where they were paying homage to, I think, it was Streets of Rage. It was called like Saints of Rage or something.
That's right. Yep. And so you mentioned that, and you mentioned Yakuza. I would love it if a future Yakuza game had a mini game that used all the in-game assets to create a 2.5D side-scrolling like brawler. Just like, you know, something short, but still, I mean, all the things are there. You got all the bosses, you've got all the street thugs, you've got all the items. It would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be interesting if it's like a side mission where Kazuma is like wants a. I mean, he's going to be an actor for an action movie, which is basically making fun of Die Hard. That'd be that'd be pretty funny.
That would be cool. Call it like Yakuza Deka or something. I don't know. But so, you know, despite the game having a lot of familiar gameplay elements, I did pose this question, but I think I can just answer it. So there are some things that make the game feel new, and there actually are some innovations that we'll get to. But I will say the things that are new is that this was Sega's first 3D beat-em-up. Another thing that is kind of taken from Fighting Vipers is that the characters' costumes degrade over time, kind of like the armor being stripped off, but I think it's built into the game. I don't think you can make it through the entire game and come out looking squeaky clean. Yeah. So that's a big thing that it took from Die Hard, though, because it starts off with John Mcclane looking like just some guy that walked in off the street. End of the movie, he's down to his, you know, undershirt. He's all bloody. He's, you know, his shoes are off. So those are just some interesting new elements that they added to the genre. So let's get into the development. This is the part that, again, is thanks to the Sega Arcade Revolution. Without this, we wouldn't have these cool behind-the-scenes stories. So, Sega made the jump to 3D brawlers thanks to the efforts of designer Makoto Uchida. Uchida had worked on Altered Beast and Golden Axe and always strived to add something new to each of his games. AM1 programmer Susumi Harai said that side-scrolling beat-em-ups were an old genre by 1996, but he recognized their mass appeal and did not want to disregard that. AM1 was tasked with developing an action game for Sega's Titan video system called the STV, which was basically the coin-op equivalent of the Saturn architecture. The STV was largely used for puzzle games and shooting games, with not as much power as the Model 2, which had games like Virtua Fighter 2. So, do you think Sega made the right move in developing Dynamite Deka on a more Saturn-friendly piece of hardware than the Model 2? And let's keep in mind what Model 2 games that were released to the Saturn around launch were like.
Well, I guess for a launch, yes. I guess short-term it made it easier, but like, you would think that they would just put all their effort into making Model 2 games easily ported, like maybe the tools, all the teams together instead of like working on two arcade boards at the same time. But I mean, this is Sega, right? Like they let AM2 go crazy and AM1's like, oh, we're on a different board. AM2's doing Model 2 games. It's like, I don't know. I just felt like they were making so much money hand over fist in this time because it was kind of like a resurgence of arcades because of like Street Fighter 2 still. Like that really did like make arcades huge again, you know? So I could see them just, I mean, it worked out for them, so I'm not giving them any grief, but
right.
It would have been interesting to see what they would have done if everybody just worked on the Model 2 arcade and like worked on conversion tools to make Sega Saturn games out of them, you know? Kind of like what they did with the Dreamcast, you know?
Right, that would have been the ideal. It was really, you know, if this game were to come out on the Model 2, I think it would have been an amazing, amazing arcade game. You know, eventually we did get the sequel, but at the time, the first game running on the Titan video system really was kind of a economical move. It's a cheap board to make it on, and as you'll see, they did it out of necessity to get rid of the boards, basically. So they were like, it's just interesting that they were making the jump into 3D fighting games, something that Sega has always excelled at. I mean, we've seen, you could probably name, 5 genres or 5 franchises from Sega alone that are within this genre. It's kind of like how Square is the RPG company. I feel like for a time Sega was the side-scrolling beat-em-up company, and it's just interesting that such a popular genre that they've worked in ended up starting off on a system that was not made to support it, and it's almost kind of like a budget title. So Uchida, he wanted to make an action beat-em-up that was more cinematic and story-driven. So again, building off of his previous games, going from Altered Beast to Golden Axe, which I think was a huge jump. As some people listening to this know, George and I aren't huge Altered Beast fans. It's a very basic game.
Yeah.
But Golden Axe, that's a step up. And then when you go from Golden Axe, Revenge of Death Adder, which is a fantastic game, to Die Hard Arcade, that's another step up. So he wanted to be more cinematic, and he felt that the STV hardware would make this possible. Uchida loved the Die Hard movies and envisioned a game that adapted the plot of the first movie. So again, this wasn't him looking to all these different elements. He was straight up like, I love Die Hard. Let's make a Die Hard game. And meanwhile, in America, the development of Saturn games was ramping up, and the Sega Technical Institute was chosen to collaborate with AM1. Sega had overproduced the STV boards, and a major title was needed to clear out the inventory. Given the game's already American-friendly inspiration of the Die Hard movies, it was the perfect match. STI had been divided into 2 groups at this time. One group was hard at work on Sonic Extreme, while the other was brainstorming ideas for new Saturn games. In anticipation of these games, STI's artists were trained to use the soft image software to create and animate 3D models. However, none of STI's projects got the green light, and they had an excess of talent with nothing to do, and thus Dynamite Deka Die Hard Arcade had a large stable of talent to pull from to assist AM1. Dynamite Deka was STI's first 3D title, and while roles were shared across the team, AM1 mainly handled programming, and STI handled character concepts, modeling, and animations, as well as the soundtrack. So, before I get into the question, just going through that, as you can see, so many things fell into place that needed to fall into place for this game. And I feel like if any of these elements were not there, they would have had a problem. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
It's like, imagine if this was a model.
I was going to say, they're lucky that like Sonic Team snubbed STI so they could get the talent so they could do all the art for this game.
Right.
And now that you say that they did the art, it does have that, like, I don't know, like, maybe it's just the way that textures look on the Sega Saturn, but like, there's something about those early 3D games that I like and stuff that I hate. You know, we always talk about the wonky lines, but there's games on the PlayStation 1 that I look at the models and it has some like, oh, that's pretty nice looking aesthetically. I mean, it's not realistic, but this game is one of those games where it tried to achieve realism and it wasn't true there all the way, but I like the way that the models look. It's weird, but yeah.
Right.
Go on. I mean, you're...
Yeah. Well, I just find it interesting because it's like we have these 3D designers who don't have anything to do. We have these boards that we need to clear out, and it needs to be a popular game. We have these Americans, and it's an American-inspired game. And it's just like, it seemed to all just work out in their favor. I mean, you know, imagine they don't have this stable of talent. They don't have STI. They would not be making the game that we got. I also think it's rare that Sega of Japan and America to be on the same page of development. Like, it seems like there's a lot of collaboration here.
Yeah.
Talking about Streets of Rage 4 was pitched to Sega of Japan by I believe, French company.
I think so.
And Sega of America, they learned about Streets of Rage 4 when the trailer hit. So,
Wow.
like, talk about not talking to your other branches. As we've discussed, Streets of Rage is a very popular American franchise, Western franchise, and yet Sega of Japan weren't like, hey, Sega of America, we're making a sequel.
Yeah.
You know?
And especially considering that I feel like, I mean, me and you, we kind of like this talk to people, right? Sometimes people that work at Sega, and it always feels like Sega has like 3, 4, 5 franchises they really think will work, and it's always like Shinobi, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage. And they've canceled so many pitches for Streets of Rage 4 throughout history that I'm surprised that they just ignored them. I didn't know that they didn't know. That's crazy. So, I mean, what do you think? Like, do you think they like, Sega didn't even do any publishing? Like, what's going on here? Like, is that a bad thing or a good? I mean, like, I don't know. The game's successful, right? Like, I see it always as a top seller right now on, like, even
in the case of Streets of Rage 4, it was successful. It's doing really well. I guess I just find it interesting that there is no back and forth communication. When they could have done so much more, they could have probably had Sega of America publish it over here. But with this in mind, talking about Die Hard Arcade, it's just so surprising to see them so open. They're like, yeah, we've got talent over here you guys can use. Move out to San Francisco. Let's get working on this. We have these boards we need to clear up. Like, it seems like there's so much back and forth, and it sounds like from the development, it was a very smooth process. And I'm trying to think of games before or after 1996 where it was a Japanese project that had Western appeal and both offices work together successfully. The only things I can really think of are like the early Sonic games and maybe the Yakuza stuff right now, because they really are roping in the localization team early on for worldwide releases. There's no like secrets being held between the teams.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Binary Domain, which is a game we're going to cover next. That game also had a big tie-in with the localization team in America, and they influenced characters within the game, which is funny because that game had, like, I don't know, it had some controversy on how it depicted some of the characters, but it's funny that it had American approval, you know what I mean? It was a big deal back then, but yeah, that's the only times I remember.
Yeah, and so I think, we'll get to that, actually. I was going to answer the next question. So Uchida and other AM1 talented actually relocated to San Francisco. They got to work in STI's offices. The STI offices had a unique U-shaped configuration with the American staff on the left and then the Japanese staff on the right. Unlike Sonic games, which had friction between STI and Sonic Team staff, which I believe started with Sonic 1, or Sonic 2, the AM1 team was described as easy and amicable. Imagine that, AM1's easy to work with and Sonic Team isn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising.
No, not at all. The lead artist and designer Stieg Hedlund talked about the working relationship between the two, saying, everything was very open door, and in particular, anytime a piece of art was completed, lead programmer Hisoshi Ando would load it into a test environment for us to see how it was working and if revisions were needed. So basically on the spot art testing, and then they just run to the other side of their U-shaped configuration and keep working and fixing it up. Communication was difficult, however, due to the language barrier, because only one member of STI spoke Japanese, which was Hedlund, who I just quoted. And I'm going to answer this one. So why do you think AM1 worked better with STI than Sonic Team did? I think it's because Sonic Team had huge egos and a lot of ownership over Sonic the Hedgehog, and I think that wasn't helped by the fact that Sega of America wanted to step in and help dictate the design and story of the first game, though I think that actually helped rather than hurt the game. But, imagine coming in with Sonic 2, which not only is their baby, but is like the sequel to this huge smash hit, and then STI's like, yeah, we got some ideas, and they're like, no, You know,
Yeah.
I love Yuji Naka. He follows us now on Twitter, but man, I can only imagine.
I'm actually happy that he follows us. I like how he just followed us because we posted that Sega Saturn art doodle scan. I will say, yes, Yuji Naka has the ego. People call him xenophobic. I don't think he's xenophobic. I think it's more of like him only trusting people that he knows and not wanting to trust his brand to other people. And I guess because it's happened to Americans a lot, that people kind of get that vibe from him. I think he looks up to, I think Yuji Naka during this time when he was a rock star, he only looked up to a few people in the industry. And I think one of those is like the AM2 staff. I remember him always talking highly of that team. So like if you had any lesser team that hasn't made a hit like AM2 has, I don't think he would have taken it likely for them to come in and like take his work or his IPs. Right. So I'm not that surprised because, I mean, let's be honest, Sonic Team at this time were like, they could do anything and they didn't want to do anything with Sonic and they didn't want anybody else to do anything with Sonic, which is kind of strange. But yeah, I'm not surprised. And also, they're not the ones doing the game for, AM1. AM1 is the one in control. While the Sonic Team thing, it was totally different. They were trying to do a project with their brand from the ground up, right? And they were using Yuji Naka's engine at the time, right?
Yes, from my memory, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's totally different. This one, they're more of assistant, so I could see why they work better with AM1 compared to... If they were assisting on, like, Knights and just doing assets, I think the Sonic Team and them would have worked better.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Let's talk about Die Hard a little bit more. The license for Die Hard was actually secured so late from Fox that the Japanese version lacks the title and character names. Yeah. Which, to my understanding, so probably through the development process, it was let's get the Japanese one finished and then let's work on the American one. There was a small gap between the releases, but not a huge one. So I'd have to imagine that was a very late in development. And honestly, it makes total sense because, well, Uchida, he said he was not bothered by this because the game always had the spirit of Die Hard, despite lacking the name and characters. I think it was important for them to get it in the American market because... I mean, imagine a game coming out called Dynamite Deka or Dynamite Cop or Dynamite Detective, and you want that to become your big game that sells through these arcade boards versus Die Hard Arcade. Like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. It's unknown who actually lobbied for Sega to obtain the license, but given that Uchida was a huge fan of the movies and being in America, in San Francisco, it's likely that he was the one who really pushed them to do it. Fox did have some stipulations and some rules that Sega had to follow, but it really was minor because first the team could not deviate too much from the film's plot. And I'm sure they were like, well, good news, we made this game. It's almost ready to ship, and it is just like your movie. And they're like, well, good thing we're not suing you. Second, the main character had to be John Mcclane, which... was not a problem because the character Bruno Dillinger basically looks like John Mcclane, especially on the cover art for the Japanese one. Yeah. But what's interesting is that the character model, while being altered to resemble Mcclane in the American one, it's a very minor color difference with his jacket and everything. They were not allowed to have it resemble Bruce Willis due to likeness rights not being secured. So if you don't know too much about likeness rights, the general idea is that, like, in some cases, like let's say with Star Wars, I got enough of it behind me here, you're always going to buy a Star Wars product where Luke looks like Mark Hamill. But in the case of Die Hard or James Bond, like look at GoldenEye, that's not Pierce Brosnan. It's just some guy that kind of evokes James Bond. That's why it was such a huge... I think maybe he was Pierce Brosnan in GoldenEye. Maybe I'm wrong. But I remember it was a huge deal when they made a first-person shooter, and it was Sean Connery. And it was like, this was the first time that Sean Connery's likeness has ever been used for a James Bond game. So with that in mind, I think more modern films, they really work with the actors to try to secure that likeness, because really the actor's face is the character. What's a recent one?
Aren't they doing the Marvel game right now where they kind of like
Avengers.
edit it? Yeah, they edited it so it's like they kind of look like cosplayers a little bit when they first showed the trailer.
Yeah,
and gave you
so
that vibe.
There's an Avengers game coming out, but they weren't able to secure the likeness rights. So you have all these film characters in their clothes, but they don't look like the character. But what I think's interesting with Die Hard Arcade is that if you look at the cover art, which we'll look at eventually here, you'll see that that's not Bruce Willis at all. It's just some like beefy guy in a shirt. However, when you look at the Japanese version, it's very clearly a ripoff of Bruce Willis. Like, it looks just like a cartoony version of him.
I mean,
and you
right
see
at
that,
the bottom of this screen, we have the Japanese thing as our little layout for Sega Talk. Yeah,
right.
So if you're watching the YouTube video, you can see it for sure.
Yeah, and so it's like, it's very clearly him. And going back to our last episode, what we did with Streets of Rage 2, that one, it stole Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger's likenesses.
Yeah.
So it's funny that they were like, man, we weren't able to get the Die Hard license in Japan, but we very clearly ripped off Bruce Willis's face. However, we did get the Die Hard license in America, and he looks nothing like Bruce Willis on the cover. So it's this kind of funny thing how they're actually kind of breaking the law a little bit despite having the license. My only guess is that because they did have the license but they weren't able to apply it to the Japanese version, they probably were able to get away with it just because Fox was like, well, we did give you the license, you just didn't really utilize it, but maybe it's some gray area.
I wonder if they get like money from the Japanese release, or is the Japanese release considered a Sega property? Because like they've been reusing, they've been using the Deka or whatever brand, right? Like still.
That's
after.
a very good point. Yeah, I guess the only way to really answer that is if you have the 2500 release, to look at the credits or the manual and see if Fox Interactive is mentioned anywhere. But they did add Nakatomi Plaza to the cutscenes, but it's never referred to as by name. So, advertising. This is always a fun bit. I didn't write really any notes. We're just going to take a look at a commercial here, and then we're going to check out 2 print ads. So let me know when you're ready to watch the commercial, and we can hold hands and watch it together. It's 14 seconds long. So
I have it. Just tell me when to press play.
All right, here we go. Let's play.
Ooh.
The music.
I love the music, dude. I would say that's actually a pretty good ad, It has a lot of gameplay. It has very catchy music. I actually like it. I'm surprised that there wasn't a US ad for like a Sega Saturn version, because I felt like this would have been a stronger like sell here. Another 15-second ad, though. I mean, you know how Sega is. They, like, just put a bunch of stuff at you with, like, really catchy jingle. Also, it was... it was also before the whole Sega Tansashiro also. So.
Yeah, that's what I thought was really interesting. There's no Segata. The music itself really reminds me of Lupin the Third. I think they were really trying to play up that wacky detective, because... well, to us stupid Americans, it's Die Hard Arcade, John McClane's a cop, but to them, it's a detective going on a wacky adventure through a building, and his name's Bruno Dillinger, and so they can make all of these kind of cultural connections to stuff over there rather than really tying it into Die Hard Arcade, and it really feels like they were like, let's do Lupin the Third. I don't know, I get really strong Lupin the Third vibes from it.
I actually do too, so that's actually funny.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's actually a great ad. I know we rip ads a lot of times on here, but it's almost all in-game footage. It's all in-game footage, really. You get the great cutscene of the title screen there. You get a great look at the 3D transitions, lots of items being used, and then I love that. Kind of reminds me of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie intro with all the tiled gameplay screens. And it's great because if you're seeing this constantly on TV, there's always one little screen that you can kind of go, oh, I didn't notice that before, so there's a lot to see. Let's look at the print ads. These ones are interesting just because they both appeared on the back of a magazine. And I say that because I believe when you get the back, it probably costs more than being on the inside. I think the inside front costs a bit, and I think the back costs a bit, and then of course 2-page spreads cost a lot. But you can imagine if you're getting this in the mail, or if you're seeing it on a newsstand, there's a better chance of seeing that back first than anything else besides the cover. What do you think about the Japanese ad here? It's simple.
Yeah, it's simple. It has the building, which if you ever heard fans talk about this movie, they say the building is part of is a character within the movie. Because I mean, if you see the promotional material for the old Die Hard movie, it's like the building and then Bruce Willis's face or something. And this one kind of looks the same, right? That looks like Bruce Willis, the hairline. Maybe he's a little more blonde. But it looks like Bruce Willis from his eyes and his nose and his face. It's always surprising that they have a girl. I'm assuming it's to add diversity because almost every beat 'em up game back then had a girl and a guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great. I actually like this art, so I think I don't know. They didn't use this art for the U.S. version, did they?
No, they didn't. But I think it is interesting. It's more Die Hard. It evokes Die Hard more than the actual American cover.
Yeah.
Which I think let's look at that American cover now. So again, this was back of the issue. Save your quarters for the laundromat. Die Hard arcade. It'll blast you like a sawed-off shotgun. Don't wear white.
Trying to play up the violence.
It really is. So it's almost, it kind of reminds me of like a Doom ad or something. You know what I mean? Like it'll blast you like a sawed-off shotgun. Okay, rookie, listen up. Your gig is to rescue a hostage and kick some terrorist butt. Use whatever it takes. Machine guns, missile launchers, flamethrowers, broken bottles. Grab a partner in 2-player mode and double team your way out of hell. So it's very much like trying to push the game as something it isn't. It's a much more lighthearted game than you'd think. Just picking it apart a little here, calling him a rookie kind of seems weird because in a game, I know like the player themselves, you're like, all right, rookie. But in this case, you're taking control of John Mcclane. He's no rookie,
Yeah. He looks nothing like John Mcclane. Do you think they had to redo the cover because they were too afraid that Bruce Willis would come over and sue him?
Probably. I mean, They probably were just like, let's go so far, not John Mcclane, that will never be sued. For the weapons, they really pushed the like machine guns, missile launchers, flamethrowers. When you play the game itself, those are in it, but it's much more like anything's a weapon. That's kind of the meme, that they played off of in Project Cross Zone. Grab a partner and double team your way out of hell just seems like over the top, gritty, grimdark. That's
sounds like really an energy drink back. It's like kick them in the butt and like, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, cool. It's very extreme. And the game,
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. Did this also? I mean, I guess the Save Your Quarters would have sold me as a kid. I would be like, man, I don't want to spend so much money. I need this in my house.
That's true.
That would have sold me. So I'm glad that they put that big. But I do agree with you that the Japanese cover's better. This one's I mean, they have the building in the back. That's cool. But like John Mcclane and the girl's not on this one either. Girls
are cool. I like girls.
She gets like a prominent spot in the Japanese cover, but in the American one, they're like, no, we got to put this one to be John Mcclane, like really big.
Yeah, and what I like about the Japanese one too is, despite it not being Die Hard, it looks like a new Die Hard story. Like if you slap that on the cover of a comic book and it was like the continuing story of John Mcclane, I'd be like, oh, cool, more Die Hard adventures. This is Die Hard 4, like at the time. but instead,
No.
I mean, I do think it was kind of a mistake for them to. I think using the Die Hard license was smart, but I think they should have pushed it as like a new story instead of being like it's the first movie, but not, because it was developed without our knowledge until very late.
I knew that the first one didn't really have the story. I mean, the Die Hard Arcade didn't have the story from the first game, but in the back of my mind, like when I saw the cover and stuff, like the Saturn cover, it just looks like it's a retelling of Die Hard 1 kind of, right? Like you wouldn't know the difference just by the cover.
Right, and it also gets confusing because Die Hard Trilogy Arcade is another game, but it's completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like 3 games in one. That's what it is.
It's 3 games in one. It's not anywhere near as good as this. It's unfortunate, but let's see. So upon release, Die Hard Arcade Dynamite Deka became one of the most successful U.S.-made arcade games in Sega's history.
Wow.
Does that surprise you?
Yeah, and I mean, not really, because I mean, if I saw it in my local dinky little theater, I'd assume that the regional chain put it everywhere. So yeah, I'm assuming they made a lot of money off of it, especially being in the mid '90s. Bruce Willis and the Die Hard franchise. They even had that trilogy game, like you said, and that one probably sold a lot too. So it makes sense.
And that's a great point. That's a great point about movie theaters, because I remember back in the day, like movie theaters were more prone to buying licensed games based on movies than anything else. I've been to theaters that would have one of the Alien Light Gun games. It would have Die Hard Arcade. It would have like a more current, like a Fast and Furious racing game. Like it just makes sense. You're going to the movies. You're in the mood for a movie. Why not throw some movie-inspired arcade games in there? You're more likely to see that than like Crazy Taxi,
Yeah, of course.
Unfortunately, this was also STI's last title. Shortly after release, the team was reorganized into Sega of America Product Development, and I don't think this was anything having to do with their performance on the game or anything. I think it was just the shifting nature of Sega itself. Remember, the Saturn was kind of a flop, and they were moving towards the Dreamcast. And as we know full well, Sega of Japan was also doing reorganizations. We had development teams kind of becoming their own little groups with their own logos. And I think Sega of America was doing their own thing to deal with this. And also, it doesn't help that STI did have a bad relationship with Sonic Team. You make one of the highest selling American Sega arcade games, but at the same time, you also pissed off Yuji Naka.
The boss. You think he tattletaled to the CEO of Sega, and he's like, get rid of these guys, they're scum, I don't like them.
I mean, I don't know about that, but it definitely does not help towards their track record. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this happened before. I mean, we had the Sega Australia that released that Mickey Mouse game and then vanished. Yeah,
and that was really well received too. As far as reviews, so the game was well reviewed at the time. But at least to me, it surprised me to see that it averaged a lot of 7s and 8s from most reviewers, especially a lot of 7s. I personally would have expected higher scores because I would have thought that at the time reviewers were being more forgiving towards 3D games, especially ones that utilized 3D well and didn't feel clunky or unplayable. Next Gen Magazine said Die Hard Arcade breathes life into a dead-end genre, which surprises me. 1996, and they're already calling side-scrolling beat-em-ups dead-end genre. Ouch.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. They called the graphics lively, but criticized how it was difficult to line up attacks, I think because of the 3D plane. The Saturn version was seen as a flawless conversion of the arcade original, so no doubt helped by the fact that they were basically on the same arcade board equivalent as the Saturn. Sega Saturn magazine said, there's not much to beat the thrill of smacking a terrorist right in his low brow with an antique grandfather clock. However, they said that the game overall was a fun fighting game that is especially suited for novice players, but it's too short-lived for more experienced beat-em-up fans. And EGM said, take away the humor, decent graphics, and simple control, and you've got a bust, which is the stupidest effing review I've ever read. It's like, take away all the things that work, and you've got a pretty bad game. And I'm like, well, what worked? The humor was good.
Yeah.
It had decent graphics.
Yeah.
And simple controls. But if you take all that away, it's a bust. Fuck off, EGM.
If it has bad... It's like, come on. It's like me saying, yeah, Mario Galaxy's a good game, but if you take away everything that makes it good, you got yourself a flop right here. And it's funny that they say it's a flop, but it's actually a very successful game in the end.
Right, yeah. I mean, look at Sonic Mania Plus, probably the most loved Sega games in recent memory. But, you take away the...
nostalgia.
The nostalgia... the great graphics and the controls, and honestly, you've got a bust. I don't know.
It sounds kind of bust. I don't like it. It's a 2D.
You take away Bayonetta's long hair.
Dead.
Yeah, right. So idiots. What a stupid review. That's kind of like nowadays. I don't know if you ever do this when you write a review for the site, but I always catch myself doing the latest game is here. But does it truly stack up to what we expected? Or is it a complete failure? Read on and find out. And then you're like, Bayonetta is one of the greatest action games I have ever played. And I'll be like, why the fuck did I open the article acting like I'm posing a question that I know the answer to? So instead I'm like, I finally got to play the game. I thought it was great. Read why. Because that just makes so much more sense than acting like you're reviewing a game that doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you said it got 7 and 8s, and I don't think that's bad. I think the game had some flaws, like you said, the length of it. I think everybody would want it to be longer. But I also do feel that I like when you play a beat-em-up game, it's better to leave wanting more than playing a game and being going, man, when is this going to end? They're just like, especially when they start reusing assets and enemies just to make things longer. Really adding, it doesn't really add anything to the game. That's when you're like, all right, I got it. So, I mean, I'd rather leave wanting more in an arcade game. So this is fair. Totally designed to be an arcade game. But yeah,
that's fair. How would you rate the game? Let's use Segabit's rating system, the grading.
I would give it a B+. So that's pretty good considering that the game does have some flaws. I think it could have been a lot better, and but it's early 3D we're talking about here. How many games from the mid 90s, PlayStation 1, 64 era hold up compared to today's games, right? So I think it's one of those few games that I could still play. I mean, you could pop it in and play with people.
I'd agree with that score. That B+ seems like a very fair score for this game. I think the sequel's marginally better, just graphically, so I could see maybe A- there. But speaking of the sequel, so Die Hard Arcade / Dynamite Deka, which I'm getting tired of saying the slash, saw a sequel in 1998. So very soon after the first one. 96 was the arcade release, 97 was the Saturn release, so 98 we saw the sequel. However, of course, STI didn't work on it, and I'm not going to get into the development of that, but it's pretty clear that it was a quick turnaround, but not with the same exact team. The title was Dynamite Deka 2 in Japan and Dynamite Cop in the West. The game was developed on Model 2 hardware and saw a port to the Sega Dreamcast. A third game titled Dynamite Deka EX, or Asian Dynamite, which sounds like Asian Dynamite, which sounds like a sushi
Dynamite?
roll.
Oh, I thought it was like Black Dynamite sequel, but with like Asian people instead of,
I'll get the Dynamite. Asian Dynamite roll. What's on that?
Yeah.
This did not see a console release or a release outside of Asia. It is extremely similar to Dynamite Cop in design, simply sporting an updated Asian aesthetic and replacing Jean Ivy and Eddie Brown with Caroline Powell and Jennifer Jeanwine, respectively. And Caroline is the president's daughter from the first game Grown Up. So you can play as the president's daughter in the third game. Finally. And I don't know, you're showing the cover art for that?
Oh yeah, it's on now. Yes.
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God, she's buff.
So let's get no. So we've got the 2500 release there. So
Yeah.
there is a Sega Ages 2500 version of the game that was released to the PS2 in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
It offered improved graphics, more modes of play, various art galleries, and a costume system, allowing you to wear Golden Axe attire. So we've got quite a few screens to look at here. So we've got the cover art, as mentioned.
Yeah.
We've got the Golden Axe screen here.
Yeah, I mean...
What do you think about that?
When I saw it in the notes, I didn't know what it was, and I was like, oh, maybe we're going to talk about how there was a beta where they tried to make a Golden Axe game in the Die Hard engine, and it leaked. And I thought this was what it was, and I was like, why is it in the building? Did they just drop it within the game just to test the models out? But it looks pretty funny. I like how the screenshots for their little face, like, does it change them to actually Golden Axe?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
But I like how Axe Battler is just some, like, dude. Like, you look at it, he doesn't...
Yeah. He has a sword that he doesn't use.
Yeah.
This is actually pretty cool. I wish it got an English release. I've never played this. Now I really want to play this. Now the PS2 Sega Ages version. And like I said, it'd be sick if we got a Switch Dynamite Cop, I guess they could call it, release.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I know I have a trip to Japan coming up within the next year, and I keep kind of thinking, like, what should I keep my eyes open for? Honestly, I'm going to look for Sega Ages 2500 games, and if I can find them for, like, decent prices, I might consider getting a Japanese PS2 to play these things, because these look awesome. And just looking at the screenshot comparisons, if you bring that up, as you can see, like, it's a completely different game. It's not a re-release. It's tonally very different. And if I'm going to be nitpicky, you know, we just talked about STI, all the hard work they did. This throws that all out the window. Yeah. Which kind of sucks because, I mean, you look at that first screenshot of them running on the Saturn, and then you look at the second screenshot of him in the hall. It looks darker. It looks a little grittier. It looks like a completely different game.
Yeah. The lighting on that, on the little bridge or whatever with the little rail. I mean, it looks really cool that they have actual light sources like that. Like, I mean, it's a PS2, but it's cool that they did some of these moves. But like you said, they do. They don't have a classic mode in it.
I think the original game is in it, so that's great. But I always just kind of wonder if the art directors are a little offended, where they're like you even look at that gate. Like, you could have used the same fence on that rooftop and you changed it. You know what I mean? It seems like all these strange little changes. Or the guy in the office on his phone, it's like, oh, let's put red curtains in the background. Let's give him a pink tie. Like, it just seems like these arbitrary changes that I kind of makes me remember like Sonic Adventure DX, where you look at screenshot comparisons and you're like, why did they change the color of the building? Like, it just seems like weird graphical art direction that wasn't necessary. And that was actually a complaint about some of the early 2500 releases. I know there's a American compilation of some of those, and if you've played the Space Harrier, it's kind of insulting. Like, it's kind of...
Some of them were like real big busts. Like they had one for our Altered Beast that was really bad, and they also went and redid Phantasy Star 1 and 2, which is crazy that they remade it from the ground up. So
wow,
they added anime cutscenes, which I think are cool because I guess it's cool to see characters you grew up with animated in a way. But like some of these releases are like weird, like. Because now when they do Sega Ages, it's just the original game with maybe a couple modes. Back then, it was like, let's remake the whole game from the ground up and only release it in Japan, so...
That's so weird. Like, how much money did they have at that time to, like, throw at this? And Sega Ages was not the 2500 series. It was not a small series.
No.
I'm bringing it up here now. There were 33 volumes.
That's crazy. I don't think they've released...
That's insane.
Anything that close on the Switch yet, right? Or the 3DS?
No way. It's one of the most one of the largest, I think, Sega branded packages. I mean, Sega Heritage only had a handful. PSN did see Dynamite Deka in Japan release in 2012. Again, for a game that's so American friendly, I'm shocked that they didn't release this at all worldwide. It just seems like such a waste of time and money. And again, talking about Sega and how they operate, this really seems like something at that time in 2006 that would have been happening, where they're like, hey, in Japan we're spending all this time and money remaking 30 games from the ground up. Let's keep them in Japan, you know?
Yeah, this just, what a weird thing to pick, though. Like, especially with was it M2? I know that back then when they were doing the Sega Aegis, it was like more than one studio and more people working on them, right?
It was mainly M2, though. The later ones, I think, they were the ones that turn things around.
Okay, good, because like they did I know they did the Fantasy Zone. I mean the one where they had 2 and they remade it with the original board. I want to see more of that, not like remake from the ground up. I guess it would have been cool if they added more modes or something to this one instead of like using all the effort to make new assets. You know.
Right. And again, if you are listening to this and want to try out some of those Sega Ages games for the PS2, Sega Classics Collection for the PS2, which sounds like a Genesis compilation disc or something, actually has 9 volumes of the 2500 releases bundled onto one disc. So that also kind of reveals just how small these are. Like, imagine on a shelf 9 DVD-sized cases, 9 discs, and they were able to cram that all into one disc easily. Like, what a waste of plastic.
Maybe that's why they kept on going. I mean, it would look cool having all of them, right? Like all 32 releases on your shelf.
Right. But imagine popping in a disc and all you're getting is a remake of Space Harrier. And
or
that's
Altered
it.
Beast. You're like,
or Altered
cool.
Beast. Right, of course. So going back to Die Hard here, so we also have Bruno Dillinger. He did make a cameo in the Sega, Bandai Namco, Capcom, Pixar, Disney, Lucasfilm, crossover, Project Cross Zone. And I didn't know it was called...
You have me. You literally have a screenshot of all the assets of the game, and he's crying.
I thought that was... I was looking at all these screenshots, and I thought this was the most interesting one. So, Bruno Dillinger's in the game. There's regional differences in his costume as a nod to Dynamite Deka, Die Hard Arcade. So depending on if you're playing the worldwide release or the Japanese release, you get the costume from your territory. The game has nods to the franchise's Die Hard roots in the in-game dialogue, and Bruno's special attack sees him using all sorts of items, including a grandfather clock. And that's why I brought this up, so you can look in here and you can actually get a glimpse at all the items he uses. So the broom, your favorite.
Yeah, the axe. There's an axe.
There's a golden axe that he actually uses, which is, again, a nice nod. I think it's really interesting that M2, who did the one with the golden axe cameos on the PS2, and then here, a completely other different studio, they still knew that there was that golden axe connection to Dynamite Cop, which I never knew until I worked on the notes for this. So
same universe.
It's interesting that at least in Japan, amongst developers, they're like, Die Hard Arcade is Golden Axe 3D, basically. Handgun. What else am I seeing here? And then after he does all this stuff, talking about the clothing degrading, he does this like crying face, and his clothes rips off and it explodes. So
perfect. And what do you think? Do you think he looks like Bruce Willis here? Like anime?
A little bit. They scaled it back a little bit, but it's the hairline that really sells it. That
the
Widow's Peak keys got.
The Vegeta. Yeah. It's funny though because like I guess he doesn't. I mean, I don't know. He looks like if Bruce Willis was a YouTuber and he had somebody like commission art for him for his channel, this is what he would look like, right? You know what I'm talking about? Where they always make themselves look a little cuter, you know?
A little cuter, and I'm going to say it, George, a little thinner.
I mean, if I'm going to commission someone to do art of me, I'm like, don't make me a fat ass. Come on,
it's always
man.
like, hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Jason's YouTube channel. And then you go to the video. Hey, gang. Another video for you.
I hate my life.
Hey.
I hate doing these videos.
It's like, I thought you were a cute little anime boy. You're a guy in his 40s who looks like he has back problems. And that kind of pretty much does it until we get to our memories. But George, is there anything you wanted to add about Dynamite Cop, Dynamite Deka, Dynamite?
I played. I just wanted to be, shameful before we ended and say that I actually played the Die Hard arcade trilogy. Or, the whatever it's called. Is it called Die Hard Arcade Trilogy or Die Hard Trilogy Arcade?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I played it all the way as a kid because it was one of the first PlayStation games I had. And I remember playing it and being kind of impressed because it was an early 3D game, but it was so violent compared to this. This is more silly, right? And the Die Hard arcade version, there's a game where you have to take down bombs, and it's a first-person racing game, and you could run over people, and they just splatter blood on your windshield, and that always kind of stuck with me. It's the franchise was you never saw John McClane just killing civilians, right, in the game. I mean, in the movie. So it's weird that Fox actually allowed that. And
right.
I think this is way more tame than that other game.
For sure. This is family-friendly Die Hard. I mean, this is the franchise, and I tried to stop myself from swearing earlier. I said effing, and then I remembered this is the franchise that made popular Yippee-Ki-Yay motherfuckers, so I think I'm allowed to swear on this one.
You get one F word.
One F. I think I dropped 3 now. So if you support us on Patreon at any level, your memories will be shared. However, on this episode, we're going to be sharing some Twitter memories because none of our patrons pulled through. I'm very angry.
Don't be angry, dude. It's cool. Everybody's busy.
It's cool.
Memorial weekend.
That's true, but it's Die Hard, and so, I don't know. But here's some of the Twitter responses that we got. We have Thomas D. Pearson. He said there used to be an arcade cabinet of this game in the bowling alley at one of the malls in the city. I had no real reference for Die Hard other than that they were action movies, and I immediately fell in love with the game, and I think it was one of the first beat-em-ups that I played. Agent Boolin says we had 3 arcades near each other. What a great game. Now we have none in this area on Long Island. Anyway, the arcade is the laser tag place had this classic. I remember thinking how fun the gameplay was. I enjoy Die Hard so much, I made a Japanese PSN account to get it. So that's the 2500 release. And then we have finally T1 said playing Deep Scan for 30 minutes straight so I can rack up credits just for a power outage to happen literally right after. Oh man, that sucks, and he didn't save. So check out the game if you can.
I was gonna say
eBay.
Yeah, check it out. It's, isn't it really rare on the US version? Maybe get
US
the
one's expensive.
Huh?
Yeah. US one's expensive. Japanese one comes in 2 flavors. I think there's a re-release version that's about $30-$40, and then the original one that's a little bit more. Honestly, it deserves a Sega Ages release on the Switch. I think it's a fantastic beat-em-up, side-scrolling beat-em-up, and again, Sega's first 3D one, so it's important there. I would not be shocked if it is a Sega Ages title. It just seems like the perfect fit. They want to move into 3D, so why not? But with that, we'll see you on the next Sega Talk. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. 5-star reviews, thumbs ups, whatever you can do. Spread the word. Tell people about the show. Support us on Patreon. Bye.
Bye.